Welcome back. Now that we have some experience creating actors, it's time to move on to the pawn class. Now, we've already mentioned that a pawn has additional functionality in addition to the functionality it inherits from the actor class. For one, it can be possessed by a controller. Now, this brings a whole new level of possibilities because if we're possessing a pawn, that means that we can control the pawn. We can add input, such as keyboard presses and mouse clicks, or just moving the mouse, and we can use this data to move our pawn. And that's what we'll focus on in this section. So we're going to need a pawn. Now, I'd like to create a basic pawn so we can just learn how pawns work. And for this, I'd like to make a bird class. So we'll make a bird that we can possess and fly around to take a look at our level and get a sort of bird's eye view. So to make a new pawn class, we're going to go to Tools and select New C++ Class, and this time we're going to choose the pawn class as the parent. Let's go ahead and click Next, and we can choose private or public. For this course, we're going to continue using public, so the header file is in the public folder, and the source file is in the private folder. Now, I'd like this bird class in its own folder, and I'm going to call this folder Pawns. And we're going to call this class Bird. So let's create this class. We'll click Create Class, and Visual Studio is going to ask me to reload all as soon as it loads. So we're going to click Reload All. And now we're presented with two new files, bird.h and bird.cpp. And we see them here in the Pawns folder. We have one Pawns folder in the private folder and one Pawns folder in the public folder. Now, just like the actor class, when we create a new class based on pawn, we get lots of boilerplate code already included for us. There's our generated.h, we have our generated body, and we also get a public and a protected section, along with a second public section down there. And Unreal Engine does us the courtesy of creating a constructor for our new class. Since our class is called aBird, it is an actor after all, as pawns are derived from actor. So it gets that A added to its name in C++, even though in the Unreal Engine editor, Unreal Engine goes ahead and removes that A for us, such as in the Blueprint editor. Now we also get begin play, so we have that override, as well as the tick function. And in addition, we have this new function that we haven't seen yet. And this is called setup player input component. Now, an input component allows us to take input, pressing a keyboard key, moving the mouse, etc., and we can access and use that data to move our pawn. So already we're seeing that the pawn has more functionality than the actor class. Now we know what a constructor is good for, setting default values for this pawn's properties, so we don't really need that comment there. We also know what begin play does, so we're going to remove that comment, as well as the comment for tick, and we'll leave the comment on setup player input component for now, at least until we get some experience learning how to use this function. And we'll get to that soon, don't worry. Now I'd like to have my public functions all in the same section, so I'm going to highlight the line with the tick function and move it up to the first public section there. And I'm going to do the same thing for setup player input component, so I'm going to highlight both lines, including the comment, and bring it up there. Now we're not using this public section, so I'm going to remove that, and we just have public and protected. Now let's head over to bird.cpp. We see that it includes its own header file, as CPP files must have, and it also has some helper comments here, and we're going to remove these as well from the constructor, as well as begin play, and the tick function. And all the way down here at the bottom, here's setup player input component. Now this is an override of a parent function inherited from the pawn class, which is why we're calling super here, just like begin play and tick. Okay, so we have our basic pawn class. So what we can do is go ahead and save everything. And back in the editor, we see that live coding has started as soon as we created that class, so we can close that window. And if we look in our C++ clashes/public pawns folder, here's our bird class. And again, Unreal Engine strips away that A, but we know that this is a pawn, and anything derived from actor and below, such as pawns, has A in the name, at least in C++. So it's really an A pawn, and the class is called ABird. Now we can create a blueprint based on this class. And in our content folder, we have blueprints. I'm going to go ahead and right-click and make a new folder here called pawns. And we'll create a new blueprint based on the bird class. So let's go ahead and right-click, create a new blueprint class, and under all classes, we'll search for bird. And here it is. We'll select it, and now we have a new blueprint, and I'm going to call this BP_bird. So now we know that this is the blueprint class because it's prefixed with BP. And if we double-click this, we can open it, and it looks a lot like the blueprint editor when we were looking at our actor class. We have a viewport, we have a details panel, as well as a components panel, and there's our default scene root. We haven't created any components, and we haven't reassigned anything to be the root component, so we still have our default scene root component. And we have the construction script and the event graph. So far this looks basically identical to an actor, but we'll be adding more functionality to our bird class. And we'll start doing that in the next lecture, but before we wrap up this lecture, I'd like to get some assets to use for our bird. If we're going to call this bird, we should have a bird mesh, for example. So I'm going to pull up the Epic Games launcher and go to the marketplace. And here in the marketplace, we can hover over free and select permanently free collection. And if we scroll through the permanently free collection, we see that there are multiple pages. We can go to page 2, and I don't see any animal assets. Let's go to page 3. And here we have Animal Variety Pack, which is free. You can see that I already own it, as I've already checked out this pack. And it has several animals. And if we scroll down here, we see that in the technical details, these animals are rigged, which means that they can be animated. In fact, it says animated yes, which means these are animated, so we can use those animations. And there is, in fact, a bird. Looks like a crow. So since we have a crow in this pack, we can add this to our project. So I'm going to click Add to Project and search here for slash. So here's my slash project. I'm going to go ahead and click Add to Project, and it'll take a minute. And once it's done, I can close the Epic Games launcher and come back into slash. And now I have a folder in the content folder called Animal Variety Pack. Go ahead and go through and check these out. I'm interested in the crow folder, and each of these folders has a maps folder with an overview map. We can double click that overview map, and here in this map, we see a bunch of birds. Now the cool thing about this map is this is sort of a showcase showing us all the animations. If we press play, now we see all the different animations, and they're just looping. So this is pretty awesome. We now have an animated bird. So we can use this for our pawn. And that's what we'll be doing in this section as we make our bird pawn class. Great job. I'll see you in the next video.